I'd like for us to start with Cedric Babu and pay tribute to him. Look, it was very sad, the passing of a sporting legend in Uganda in every sense of the word. But after a few days of reflecting and mourning and everything, you realize that we only live once. And when people build the kind of legacy that Cedric did, then we choose to celebrate them. At least here on Mark to Mark, we'll do that.
Oh, yes, Mark. Cedric was quite a character. Cedric was a very talented sportsman. Mark, obviously, you shed more light on that, having gone to the same school with him. But I was talking to people who are his classmates, his peers, William Blake, the IOC member, Edgar Biama, Jim Izire, Brian Ravogo, Dennis Midesebugwao, and they'll tell you that for Cedric, tennis came naturally. You know, he had everything about him was effortless when he played the game. And I was told of this famous clash with Paul Busharizi when Cedric was in O-level, I think in Senior 3, and I think Bush was in Senior 5 or Senior 6.
Senior 5, Bush was my classmate.
And obviously the O-level students were rooting for Cedric. Bush was the favorite because he was the older player and was a good tennis player at that. And I'm told Cedric cleaned him on the court. Like, he disrespected him. He gave him absolutely no chance. Wow. In that game. Must have been around either 89 or 90.
It was 1990. I was courtside.
You're courtside. Wow, so, interesting. Yeah. So, yes, but so Cedric was, he was a talented tennis player. He had his clashes with Bob Ndiwami and Komakech in one of those glorious eras for Ugandan tennis. But beyond that, Mark, Cedric was sport. Cedric, we know what he did with kinetic management when they introduced the Friday Night Lights with the Chamringers, and it was one of the properties which went somewhere in turning around basketball and the popularity. Beyond that, Cedric had a 21st century mindset to how sport should be run, not just in tennis and basketball, but all around as a subsector. And of course, he was one of the people who was behind that, should I call it a revolution, at the Uganda Olympic Committee when they were removing Rogers Dungu, who had tried to extend the tyrannical methods of the late Major General Francis Nyangweso. So the Cedrics and Dennis Galabuzis, Ambrose Tashobias, William Blix and the likes, Don Rucaris. So you can accuse Cedric of many things, but not of having been passionate about sport, having loved sport, and having defined his life as a sportsman who excelled at it, and also led the Uganda Tennis Association with distinction.
Thanks, Mark. That was quite the roundup. Yeah, when you talk about Cedric and I being in the same school, it is very much true. It's very important, of course, for me to point out that I was his sports minister. So we were in St. Mary's College, Chisubi together. I was 2 classes ahead of him, and I was the sports minister at school. So Cedric is somebody that I saw grow as a sportsman and somebody with whom I associated as a friend. And for us in the sports fraternity of SMAC, we were always tight-knit. We all knew each other and all.
Yeah.
Because I tried my hand at everything, virtually everything. Obviously, I was bound to run into him. So when you talk about that famous clash between Cedric and Paul Busharizi, I was actually courtside for that match, and it was quite the draw. Paul Busharizi had come in from Kenya, where he'd got a very good tennis education early in his life, and then he'd gone to Mbarara.
So he shared something in common with Cedric, because Cedric was born in Kenya.
And then Paul Busharizi spent a lot of his formative years there in Kenya. Then went to Mbarara, and then from Mbarara came to SMAC. We came into SMAC in the same year, Paul Busharizi and I. But so me as their sports minister, one of the things I used to do was to organize the school track when they had to come to Kampala to compete at Lugogo with the rest of the country in the schools, tennis championships and everything. Yeah. So the best tennis players in SMAC when I was sports minister were Cedric Babu, Paul Bosharizi, and Victor Rumanyika. So those three, along with a few others, I'd organize the school track for. So I came with them every single time they came to Lugogo to compete. And
are you saying the school track was taking only three?
Those three and a few fans. No, there was a few other players and then a few students as fans and everything. We used to make those trips, but I remember quite vividly that I used to accompany these guys to Lugogo. And one of the things, of course, that stood out was it was a very good era for tennis, for young players, especially because of what was happening in Jinja.
Yeah.
Jinja had such a budding sports environment of academy that was nurturing cricket players, tennis players, everything, virtually name it, volleyball, football, and everything.
Yeah.
And so there were some famous clashes between Cedric and Busharizi and Victor Romanyika with the guys from Jinja. Renato Sebi, the late Charles Yokwe, Shaban Luanga, those guys. These are the guys, those are the matches that used to light up Lugogo.
And the name is mentioned grew up around Jinja Club.
Around Jinja Club,
because Jinja is a place whose architecture I have on my palm.
Yes.
And even the late Brown Tolit was actually a very good tennis player.
As well,
in as much as he eventually ended up in golf. Charles Yoko, you mentioned, won the Uganda Open, but he was also golf, a tennis player and a golfer,
I think most Ugandans actually know Yokwe as a golfer.
Yes, they name him as a golfer, yes. But they know Yoko as a golfer, yes.
Yes, but I think golf even came later in his life than the tennis I'm talking about. Because when they were kids, Sebi and Yokwe, I think they were even brothers.
Yes.
Then there was a few other players, like I said, Shaban Luang and others.
Sons of the late Sadio Nito, Uganda's greatest ever golfer.
Yes, they were Nitos, all of them. They came in there and they were really, really good. So they had some I'm talking epic battles with Cedric on center court at Lugogo. I'm talking 1990 and 91, between 90 and 92, when I was in SMAC and Cedric was 2 classes below me. Cedric, of course, came from a class of very many sportsmen. It was a very vibrant sporting class in SMAC. It's the same class in which he played rugby with Hakiza. The big Hakiza, one of the greatest players we've ever had.
Andrew Hakiza. Yes.
Yeah, Andrew Hakiza. It's the same class in which he's the same class he shared with people like Dennis Mbide, guys who are football guys who, it was difficult in school times, especially in our times, for guys several classes lower to make, say, the school team of football or any other sporting discipline, but football mostly. But those guys were playing with us on the school team because they were that talented and that good that year. So it was a special year, and it's the same year, of course, that the same class that they shared with.
And Mark, typically
with General Mohozika and Rugaba.
I don't know about the schools of today, but I was in Aminango College. The fact is, you had to be very exceptional to be in the school team when you're in senior 2, senior 3. When there are people who are in A-level, who are bigger bodied, who are obviously more experienced, there had to be something special about you.
Yeah, absolutely.
To be in the national team.
Yeah, you had to be because the A-levels dominated everything.
Yes.
The bigger the class back in the day, the more chances that guys got on there. So you'd get a few average talents making the school team ahead of some very talented young S1s and S2s and S3s because they had to bide their time, go through the ranks, go through the hierarchy. We had different training pitches at SMAC where guys, to make the main pitch, to be a part of a training on the main pitch, you had to have played through the ranks of all the others.
It's something with the Milango, because
so we even had names
to play at Bugembe, it was called Bugembe. Bugembe was for the A-levels. You had to just be an A-level. There's no way you'd be an O-level and then you're going to
play there. Bugembe, But that class, the Cedric's class, with the Mbides and Romanyikas and those guys, and the Andrew Hakizas, and it was a special one as far as sport is concerned. It was very talented. So, and typical of us kids who grew up in that era, we played different sports and excelled at a few. I did, but we're talking Cedric here. And Cedric also did play. You'll find pictures, very old pictures of him lining up with the rugby guys because he did play, he would have his hand at rugby, as well as at basketball and all. He was of a good height. But tennis is where he was best, he was most talented. And back then, I remember, for me, the comparisons I'd already made, I'll tell, for people who want to know the kind of tennis player Cedric was, I'll say that Cedric played on court with the temperament of Goran Ivanisevic. and maybe Marat Safin. Marat Safin came later. But that is the temperament with which Cedric played. A very naturally talented guy.
Yeah.
Big server. Cedric was a big server in an era where we didn't have such big serving in Ugandan tennis. Most of what happened, because Ugandan tennis players grew up on clay
Also, when you talk about those two gentlemen, he must have smashed his racket a couple of times.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's why I'm talking about the temperament here. Because we grew up in that era where it wasn't such big serving because kids had grown up on clay courts. All around Uganda, what we have is clay courts, and most of the world actually have clay courts. There are fewer grass courts than anywhere, and than anything else, or hard courts.
And fewer stud courts.
Yeah, exactly. So they used services as just the start of a rally. Most of the guys I'm talking about, even the kids from Ginger, Cedric was a big server. He had height on him, and he could serve huge, like Goran at the time. Goran was left-handed, Cedric was right-handed, but the comparisons were so many. Temperament was, yes, Cedric smashed quite a few rackets. Yeah. He lost his cool quite easily because he was super competitive. And it's the same. And the natural talent was like that, like I say, of Safin. He was so good, so early, you just wondered where he picked up this out from. Eventually, it led to him actually getting a tennis scholarship into the US because Cedric left Uganda for the United States of America on a tennis scholarship. Wow. It was something unheard of back then.
I know Mark can talk about Cedric till tomorrow, but the thing is, I'll mention two things about Cedric.
Yeah.
In my encounters with him.
Yes.
And there are quite several. But one, obviously Cedric was articulate.
Yeah.
Well spoken, and he's someone who I loved exchanging ideas and in interviews with.
Yes.
Because he came across as someone who was forthright, someone who was really knowledgeable on whatever topic was discussing in sports, be it issues to do with maybe the amounts of money which had been apportioned for football against all the other disciplines, the National Sports Act, the sports policies, and so forth. So he was the kind of guy, it was a journalist's dream for me because you called him, he picked. If he didn't pick, he would always call back. I would give you an appointment, he'd always keep time. And he was that sort of person, quite a decent human being. In the words of Brian Rabogo, he was quite a decent human being in every aspect. So the people who've been making all sorts of opinions and allegations about him, obviously they don't know the person they're talking about. But secondly, a couple of years ago, Cedric tells me that he'd wanted to meet the president for a very long time. So he asks his friend, his classmate, General Mosken Rugaba, to make an appointment. And General MK makes the appointment for Cedric with the president.
Yes.
And they met in Rachtura. I meant to understand that when you meet the president in Rachtura, he's at his most peaceful. He'll give you all the time you need.
So I hear. Yeah.
You're more likely to get what you want from the president if you meet him in Rachtura, as opposed to Entebbe or Nakasero. So he has 1.5 hours with the president. 1.5 hours. Many people fight for 5 minutes with the head of state or 10 minutes. He gets 1.5 hours with President Museveni. And he's telling him, Your Excellency, there are many things which sport can do to transform this country, because the bulk of the Ghanaian population is of people who are below 30 years. And I think sports is one subsector which appeals to them, which can entice them. And if we did so many things around sports, we can draw their attention into employment, into supporting the subsector, to create a living, to give them direction, to take them off drugs and all these other vices. And but we need to do A, B, C, D, and F, G. And I don't think maybe as the government, the NRM government has given them sufficient time and attention to do the things we're supposed to be doing. And I think sports is a multi-billion-dollar sector in which we can, there's so many ways in which we can leverage around it to offer hope and direction to the young people. So the president listens and listens and listens. So after 1.5 hours, at one point Cedric said, I wondered whether this man was listening to me, because he was looking at the skies. He wasn't dozing. I could see he was listening, but he was not saying anything. So eventually, after 1.5 hours, the president calls his son and then tells him, I've listened to this young man of ours, this son of ours, take him to that place of ours. So Cedric is confused. So they come back with General MK from Rashtura to Kampala. So they drive apparently to one of the hospitals, military hospitals. And when they got there, the president, Cedric, showed him people who had been obviously wounded in the battle, people who had been trying to pacify places in the region. And the message to Cedric eventually learned the message was that everything you've said is important, and they acknowledge it. But as head of state, I have more pressing issues which I must handle. Once I handle these, then I'll give attention and direction to what you're telling me. But I don't want to believe that Cedric's message was in vain, because when you see all the monies which have been redirected to sports, in this period, Mark, as you understand, the stadium infrastructure developments and Chan and Pamoja and Terrieta and etc. You want to believe that maybe, just maybe, because this encounter was a couple of years ago. It wasn't recent. So maybe Cedric's efforts were not in vain.
No,
and
I agree with you, Mark. They can't have been in vain. There's so many people who have, in one way or another, transmitted that message to the president and the first lady, her being the Minister of Education and Sports. And at forums like those, there are people who got one-on-ones like Cedric. There are people who have used occasions like gatherings where the president was honoring a successful sportsman and all. People like the Cheptegeis and Kiplimos and Kiprotich and Kipsiros have done this. So there have been so many. So when the voices are that many saying the same thing, ultimately it seeps through, which is why.
And of course, a voice like Cedric's was obviously very powerful because Cedric knew how to articulate his points.
Absolutely.
It was very, very categorical, very clear about what was needed, and hit the nail on the head. And sometimes was brutally honest before the powers that be, which maybe is not going to be as easy for a Cheptegei or a Dennis Onyango or all the other guys who've
passed on the message. That is true, Mark. So ultimately, those voices built into this, because the president, in so many of the speeches in recent times, over the last 2-3 years, when he's been either honoring successful sportsmen coming back from the Olympics or World Championships or All Africa Games or Commonwealth, or whether it's been when he's launching, say, the construction of Hoima Stadium or Akibwa in Lira and all, he's confessed to how sports was never a priority. And he has given those same reasons he was talking about. Security issues and the need to pacify the region and things like that. And how ultimately, though now, he believes that he should turn to sport. When you talk about Cedric and articulation, Cedric was a very articulate, very intelligent man. Sometimes actually you didn't know it until you actually had one-on-ones and had his insight and his ideas. And he was also a man of good grooming. Most of the clips that have been going around, most of the pictures you see and the videos and all, are of a very well-dressed, sharply dressed fella who likes his style. I've seen him in videos with music videos of Ryonga and whoever, some of them which I did not even see before, but I've seen those. And that was the Cedric, because then he got into the entertainment industry through Kinetic. But I just wanted to take you back to the tennis beat, Mark, very quickly, and tell you that you spoke about Bob Ndibwami earlier. So there were clashes he had with Bob Ndibwami and the Ginger Boys and all. But later, when he got into tennis, its administration and everything, he actually revived the game, because the game had died out a little. Because in Cedric's time...
there was competition and there was stagnation.
Stagnation. Because in Cedric's time, there was a time when we competed in Davis Cup tennis, and Cedric played for Uganda in Davis Cup competitions and all, when some of these guys came to town.
I remember Sagisan was 66th in the world.
When he came
to
Uganda, And there was, what is the Greek Cypriot?
Nick
before him there was another, but I'll remember. But never mind. So then when he got into administration, he helped revive that. First of all, the juniors, that ITF program, which was a juniors program, which he helped so that they could start coaching young players and everything, and then get back into the competitions. So after his clashes with the Ndibwami generation and everything, he helped groom Duncan Mugabe,
Yeah.
David Oringa,
Yeah.
Simon Oyela, those that new generation of tennis players that came up.
Yeah, even David Olobo before the youngest. Yes.
Before those all those kids have gone through Cedric's hand, and he's had a say in how they've come out as very talented young players who have then kept Uganda tennis torch shining. At the time when he emerged, when I'm talking about 1990, and he had started before that, before I joined SMAC, but I'm talking 90 to 92 when I was in SMAC.
Yeah.
When he emerged, Uganda, the tennis world in Uganda, the names you talked about were Patrick Tibbs and John Oduke and Patrick Tibbs. Those are the two biggest names. And then you had the Ofuyuru family. I don't know if you heard of them.
Yeah.
Because they were multi-talented guys.
Yeah, badminton
tennis, and everything, yeah.
Eric Gilbert.
Yeah, Gilbert. Those are the guys. That was the generation after whom Cedric took over. And that generation took over as the best tennis players. But he's helped groom these guys. And then he's turned out to be a leader, an innovator, a mentor, a coach, an administration man, a manager, apart from just being a player. So at NCS, we've been paying tribute to him because we have something with the public. We're going to share with the public at NCS. And this is how I was framing the wording for our members, for Cedric, as all of those things. So he was Mr. Tennis, he was Mr. Sport. And I think Mark will wrap it up there and say, rest in peace.
Oh, yes. Rest in peace, Cedric.